Okay, so hi everyone, and we are live here in Copenhagen, and we have arrived here to live stream the Scansa Forum event, and its main speaker is here with us, and he's of course the legendary Jared Taylor. So how have you been doing?
Oh, I've been doing very well, thank you. I'm not sure I'm the main speaker, and I'm certainly not legendary, but I'm delighted to be here for my second Scanza Forum. I think Frody does a wonderful job organizing these, and I'm very grateful for his hard work.
Yeah, and I heard that this is your first time in Denmark, so, or is it?
No, I was here in 1970,
Oh,
well before you were born, I suspect. But I've not been here since 1970.
yeah, I've been given fake news then.
Yes, there's lots of that around. Be careful.
Yeah, so I guess I have to ask at least one like basic tourist question. So, what do you think about Denmark? What do you know about Denmark?
Well, when I was here in 1970, I was a hitchhiker and a vagabond, and the people were very kind. And so far, I've been in Denmark for about 5 hours. And I've been lost several times, and everyone has been very kind and very helpful. And it's delightful, of course, that everyone speaks such a good English, too. So I can be an ugly American as much as I like and expect everyone to speak English.
Yeah, do you think you can see any visible change? You have been around for a long time.
Well, in 1970, of course, you never saw a non-white face anywhere. And so far, I've seen, I haven't really spent much time looking around, but there is certainly some change. But it's not as dramatic as visiting Paris or London, for example.
Yeah.
Nothing like that.
And I would like to get to your ideology because you're, of course, a very famous white advocate. I think you coined the term white advocate. And you have written books about your beliefs, but what do you think were your main influences that led to your current worldview?
Well, Samuel Francis, who died in 2005, he was very much an influence on the way I think. Also, Wilmot Robertson, he wrote a book called The Dispossessed Majority that had a big influence on me. And also a man named John Baker. He was a professor at Oxford University, and he wrote a very careful and detailed treatise about how races differ. I would say that those three people were my most powerful intellectual influences. But really, to understand that the races are different and to understand that white people face a terrible crisis of dispossession, of being replaced by others, doesn't really require that much study. It simply requires looking around and seeing what is happening to our people and these suicidal impulses that white people seem to have.
Yeah, it's interesting that we are still debating things that are obvious to everyone. You don't need statistics and you don't need studies because you can just look around and see for yourself how things are. And do you think your like upbringing and background affected how you became? Like, was your environment like naturally conservative?
No, my environment was not conservative at all. Many people ask me, once they learn that I was born in Japan and lived in Japan until I was 16 years old, they think, well, this must have formed your appreciation of homogeneous societies. You must have seen the way Japan remains exclusively Japanese, and this must have influenced the way you think about the United States and Europe. In fact, that's not true at all. My parents were very liberal. They were missionaries, and they thought race was an utterly unimportant distinction between human groups. It was only gradually in my late 20s, early 30s that I began to understand the importance of race and the importance of preserving our own race. But then, of course, looking back at my experience in Japan, and I've been back to Japan many times since I was a child, I now recognize how fundamentally important it is for Japan to have maintained its own cultural and racial and ethnic homogeneity.
Yeah, and Japan can actually do it without much condemnation from the outside.
Well, just about every non-white nation can do that. No one is really insisting that the Chinese or the Koreans or the Venezuelans admit millions of Middle Eastern refugees, for example. It's only white countries that the world seems to think that we have an obligation to let these people come and come in such numbers that we are going to be reduced to a minority. No one asks the Turks, for example, or the Vietnamese to let in Syrian refugees. But so I know it's a double standard that affects us and only us.
Yes, it's interesting to see these, for example, people in the entertainment industry, like Bono. I don't know if you have heard about his outburst at the Sweden Democrats.
No, no, I haven't heard about this, but I'm sure he was very angry that the Sweden Democrats had a more successful experience in the most recent elections.
Yeah, he actually or likened the Sweden Democrats to Nazis on stage. He made Roman salutes in reference to them, and he said that white, blue-eyed, blonde Swedes are boring.
Oh, he said they're boring. Well, then he can leave, can't he? Yes. Why does he have to come to Sweden if he thinks they're boring? You know, it's amazing to me. You call the Sweden Democrats Nazis. What if you found a real Nazi? I mean, there are such things, I suppose. What would you call them? Ultra Nazis? Hyper Nazis? Double plus Nazis? This idea that the Sweden Democrats are Nazis is just so complete. It shows you how ignorant someone like Bono is.
Yeah, and Younes can actually most likely ask good questions about the European situation.
Well, yeah, the thing with Bono, there was a Red Eyes. Henrik did a good thing, a good video about Bono, his concert or his appearance. I don't know in which country it was, but he 2 days after or 1 day after the election, he was he had a performance with a CGI thing, and he was like a devil, and it was insane. I mean, he was talking about Jimmy Åkesson, who is the Sweden Democrats, the main guy, the leader, and he's not even blonde haired. So he shouldn't be boring, but yeah, it's well the rock musicians. Well, some are clever, but mostly they are not. And well, the situation in Europe, well, it's rising everywhere. The far right in Italy, in Austria, in every country. In Sweden, they have 18%. They are recounting the votes currently in Sweden, and they have 18%. 4 years ago, they got less than 13%, so it's more than 5 points more. So it's rising everywhere. In Finland, we have the elections next April, and yesterday, in fact, 2 days ago in Brussels, they had a discussion about Hungary. They want to punish Hungary because of their well, they are not open border. They are taxing the NGOs that are favoring the migration thing, and also, well, there are lots of things. Hungary is acting like an independent country, and that doesn't suit the EU. So the European Union they want to put sanctions, but they really have no means to do it. So it's a very interesting thing, because I think in 5 years they will have to blame every country in the European Union that, hey, you are not following our orders, hey, you are not, and finally it will fall apart. So
What astonishes me about the sanctions that they would like to apply, which will not be possible, of course, because to apply sanctions of that kind, it would be withdrawing voting rights from Hungary. But for that, they would have to have unanimous vote of all the other EU countries, and I'm sure Poland would not go along. So this is really just an empty threat. But what amazes me about the accusations against a country like Hungary is that they are violating European values, as if committing suicide, committing some sort of foreign policy that replaces us by foreigners, especially Muslims, that is a European value. If there is Europe, if there's anything that could be described as a European value, it's because the ancestors of today's Europeans fought the Muslims. From 732, the Battle of Tours, to 1683 at the Siege of Vienna, for 1,000 years we have been fighting the Muslims. And to think somehow that it is a European value to commit suicide like this. This is yet another example of the insanity that seems to have seized all of the leaders across the Western world.
Yeah, the EU one, their thing is that Hungary is not applying the European values, and as you said, yeah, Hungary has a long history of fighting Muslims and being a Christian country, and their prime minister has said that we will not take any illegal migrants because they are our country is a Christian country, and the vote that took place 2 days ago it will go further. And as you said, it has to be an unanimous decision, and most likely Poland will, or any other Eastern European, or even Italy will say no. So, and even if Hungary did lose its voting rights, it wouldn't matter because they just do what they do.
It's my impression, perhaps I'm mistaken, but my impression is that Hungary would completely leave the European Union rather than be forced to take in immigrants that it doesn't want to have. I hope that's the case. That's been my fear ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the idea that in Eastern Europe, where you had a fairly healthy racial and national attitude, those countries were nevertheless not as wealthy as the West. And I was always afraid that somehow they would be bribed. They would say, join the EU, we will give you all these subsidies, but you must change your immigration policy. You must become multicultural like us. But my impression now is that even if there is that temptation of European Union money, a country like Poland or Hungary or maybe the Czech Republic, they would leave the Union rather than see their countries transformed. I hope that's the case. Is that your impression as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Hungary, they are only in the EU for the money,
Yeah.
and they don't apply the things that and it's the same thing with Italy. Now that Salvini got voted in, he has been strong on the Italian borders, and the EU has said, okay, we will give you 6,000 euros for every illegal migrant, but Salvini said no. And most of the Western European countries, they can be easily bribed for some reason, because I think they just they are acting. They say, if we please these EU guys, it's a good thing. But the Eastern Europeans or the new or the so-called far right in Italy, since they are nationalists. They don't care about the money. The money is secondary, and that's what we would want in our country also to be. Because in Finland, we look at Finland, we have 12 MEPs, and only 2 voted against the Hungarian Article 7 thing that happened. So most of our parties, they are only following what the EU says, and what we would love is that Finland would become like Hungary politically. And it's not a bad thing, but in the media and in every place they are portraying this as a bad thing, and that's the situation in Europe.
Well, to me it's astonishing that you have countries like France or Germany where in France you have to have armed guards constantly guarding the Eiffel Tower for fear that some Muslim might want to throw a bomb. Or in Germany, you have to have guards for Christmas markets, Christmas festivals, because someone might want to destroy that. And as Viktor Orban has frequently said, we see the choice. We see what you have to go through. Why on earth would we want that? Why? And there's no possible answer to that question. I think I agree with you that this sense of nationality, this sense of requiring this feeling that we must defend the West, this is rising all throughout Europe and in the United States as well. There is an increasing sense that we have been on the road to nowhere for 50, 60 years. The United States must not turn into just a third world country. But we have gone down that road much farther than any European country has gone down. It's going to be much more difficult for us to save Western civilization in the United States than it will be in Europe.
Yeah, the US is like many Western European countries that France or Germany or the UK or Sweden they opened their borders in the 50s or 60s. Sweden opened them in 1975. But all these Eastern European countries, since they were under the Soviet regime, they didn't have this problem. They had their problems, but not this quite unsolvable problem. Or it's very difficult to. If you want to solve the Swedish situation, it takes tough measures. In Finland, we opened the borders in 1990, but our immigration has been quite low. So we are still we can change the situation, but Sweden and all these other countries, it's but of course we are here in Denmark, and Denmark doesn't look as bad as the Netherlands, where we met you in last year's October, and
What do you think about the rising nationalist movement in Europe? That we have Salvini, we have Janez Janša, we have Orban, we have all these right-wing or nationalist politicians coming up everywhere, and they are gathering more votes. But is it too little, too late?
I don't think so. I'm very optimistic about Europe. I'm more optimistic about Europe really than I am about the United States in some respects, because take France. What percentage of the population of France is non-European? They don't really keep very good statistics, but it's what, 12%, 15%? In the United States, already 38% or more of the population is not European in the United States. We've gone far, far, far further down this road than any European country. So it is very difficult to unscramble the omelet, because we have been a multiracial country even when we were colonies, because there was this original population of Indians, and then we made this spectacularly stupid error of bringing blacks into the United States. And then ever since 1965, when we changed our immigration policy, we've just been pouring Hispanics and Asians and people from everywhere into the United States. And so we have a more difficult problem in that respect. We have other advantages, though. We still have the First Amendment. We can talk about racial differences in IQ. We can talk about possible solutions in a much freer way, I think, than in some European countries. But the demographic challenge that we face is far worse than in any European country.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Eastern European countries. I'm old enough to remember the Iron Curtain, and we used to feel so sorry for these people living on the wrong side of the Iron Curtain. They lived under communism. And now I recognize that this division of East and West was a kind of prophylactic, it was a barrier to all of the poisonous ideas that I believe primarily originated in the United States and infected Western Europe, but Eastern Europeans were saved from that. And they have, of course, the best chance of preserving some kind of genuinely national European and Western civilization than any of us now.
Yeah, Finland is a bit in between the middle, because we are we were not under the Soviet Union, but we had our borders closed until 1990. When the Soviet Union collapsed, we got the first so-called refugees from the Somali refugees that came from Moscow, because well, it's I will not go into this, but yeah. But for France, if you look, France doesn't have racial statistics, but they have this one test that they perform for every newborn, and it's a what sickle cell test, and this proves, or this shows that in big cities, if for example Paris or the Paris area, 75% have this sickle cell disease or this. So
They have had the test made.
yeah, and so we can imply from this that the newborn, and if you go to Paris, you can see that it's not Europe, as Trump said, it's not European anymore.
Yeah.
But there was one thing, but you talk so well that I keep on forgetting my points. Maybe.
I wanted to ask you something about Africa, since you brought Africans up. That I assume that you have been following the situation in South Africa.
Oh, yes, yes. Once again, here is something that is so obvious to you and me and to anyone that can see clearly the terrible crisis that white people are facing in South Africa. We have a situation in which we have a black government that is deliberately changing the Constitution so that they can take the property of white people. And now it will be legal. I suppose if they change the Constitution so it's legal to kill white people, then killing white people will be legal. This is utterly meaningless, this plaything that the Constitution has become. But then as soon as, I don't know if you follow this in the United States, when President Trump talked about this crisis that whites are facing in South Africa, he was accused of just recirculating white supremacist ideas. It's absolutely incredible. But yes, South Africa has gone down this path of dispossession even further than the United States. Now, what will happen in the United States if we continue down this path probably will not be quite as terrifying as South Africa, because we will end up with Hispanics, with Asians, with a whole mix of people, and the dispossession of whites will not take place in quite the same way. But this is a message to every white nation. When you let yourself become a minority, there is no telling what can befall you.
And I'm always interested to hear the multiculturalist ideas on South Africa and their explanations. And some people who admit that there are problems are actually gleeful about it. Those people who admit that, yes, whites are suffering there, are actually saying that, well, they are just getting their just desserts. And I have seen white Finnish anti-racist or so-called anti-racist actually be gleeful about the suffering of other white people. And I always wonder, how can someone end up hating their own race so much? So what is it?
I wish I had an answer to this question. What white people seem to think about their own race is completely unnatural. Never in the history of the world has a people turned against itself this way. Never in the history of the world has a group that was capable of defending its borders and maintaining its majority somehow convinced itself that it is virtuous to let people come in and change their institutions, change their religion, change their society, change their way of government ultimately. That is what we face. And why white people are doing this, it's a mystery and a puzzle to me. I know there are many theories about this, but none of them are satisfactory to me. We suffer from a kind of pathological altruism. We have a kind of sickness, an ability to see the point of view of others that can be taken advantage of and manipulated. And all non-white people seem to recognize that in us and take advantage of it instinctively. But unless we shake off this pathological altruism, we will simply be shoved aside. And that's why, of course, the example of Eastern Europe is so encouraging, where you have not just one country, but several countries that are prepared to say, no, we wish to remain who we are. And if we did not have the example of Eastern Europe, I think it would be very, very difficult for us to put up the fight that we're doing now. It really gives us something to show as an example. Here's a country that doesn't have all the problems that you're inviting them to have. But to answer your question, I wish for years I've been trying to figure out what is it that makes white people so susceptible to this suicidal impulse, and I don't have a good answer for it.
Yeah, I guess that will be a mystery to us.
Yeah, there's many countries that have applied the multicultural dream. South Africa is one of them. Well, of course, it's a different situation. South Africa, in the 400 years ago, when the Dutch and the British first went there, the black population was quite non-existent, but it grew, and whereas in Europe, these people have been brought in, and through their higher birth rate, they have become, in some places, the majority. In Sweden, if you look at many cities or places, they are the majority. But you mentioned the First Amendment, and that's I would love to have also this, but in Finland we don't have this. Well, now we are in Denmark, but in Europe mostly we have these hate speech laws, which you do not have. But of course there's this that in spite of having, despite the First Amendment, you in the U.S. you haven't been able to fight this because your views haven't been taken in the media. The media brings their things, and there was I met a very fine French guy in Finland. His wife is Finnish. He used to be. He was an ambassador for 47 years. He was in Saudi Arabia in the 60s, in Iraq in the 60s. He was in the Soviet Union. He was in China. He was in Cuba. He was in Cyprus. He was also in the United States. And now he lives in Finland. And he held a speech in Finland. And I subtitled his video. And I am under investigation. I will be. I will have to pay money because I subtitled it, but he's a very fine. He was born in 1947, and he told like in the 50s or 60s in France you had black people, but there were so few that they integrated. There was this assimilation policy, and they wanted to become not French but French citizens, whereas now it's become like these French ghettos. They are like they are very violent. It's like Chicago in so. But my point is that the First Amendment, which you have, hasn't helped in this case.
Well, it has helped in some ways. You cannot go to jail or be fined for saying something. But it is true that there is a considerable amount of censorship in the United States by these major internet companies. That is a real problem for us because the internet has been by far our best way to get truthful and sensible ideas about the demographic future available to more and more people. Just as an example, I started American Renaissance in 1990 as a print publication. It was a monthly print publication. We never had more than about 4,000 subscribers. But now, sometimes we may have as many as several 100,000 people come to our website every month. So it has made our reach vastly, vastly greater. But this, of course, is why Twitter or YouTube or Google, Facebook, that's why they're so terrified of us. And they are private companies, and so they are not subject to the First Amendment. At least that's the way things have been interpreted so far. And so if YouTube, for example, decides that, well, we're not going to allow anyone to talk about race and IQ, they can make that decision. At least at this point they can do so. So we have to be careful to some degree, even though there's no law against it. We are at the mercy of private companies. I know that in Sweden, there was this breakaway party from the Sweden Democrats, the Alternative for Sweden. They had a YouTube channel. And I understand that their YouTube channel was completely abolished because they were objecting to the fact that there was some immigrant who was on Swedish television, some anchorman in news who didn't really speak proper Swedish. And this alone meant that they were kicked off of YouTube. And their point is, not only are they being denied an opportunity to reach an audience, it's an American company, it's a foreign company that can strangle their voice. It's an extraordinary situation. I recall just a few days ago, the head of state of Myanmar, we used to call Burma, he had a Facebook account and he would reach people by means of Facebook. And this American company pulls the rug out from under him. Here's a head of state. Now, people will say that maybe he's an oppressive guy, but an American company can turn off the switch and all of a sudden this guy can't communicate to the people he wants to communicate with. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, we have had problems with YouTube also. It's it's painful, but yeah, there's a very interesting debate currently in the United States within this. Should these companies have the right, or should they be considered as public utilities? And that's. I hope that it goes so that they will be obliged to let anybody speak, because these community guidelines. It doesn't make any sense. It's just an excuse for them to manipulate the who gets banned or who doesn't get banned. And it's also the Sweden Democrats. Also, they got a strike for one video during the campaign, because they made a video where they explained how the Social Democrats how they behaved 100 years ago in Sweden. They were working with the Nazis, and they were the bad guys 100 years ago. But this is such a painful truth that YouTube. Well, if you get enough people to make to cause strikes, YouTube will do it, and for no reason. It's completely insane. I hope this will change. And currently there's a very interesting debate with Twitter. Also, you have the court thing that your account was removed for no reason.
Yes, the reason they gave was absolutely astonishing. I thought they were going to say something like inciting hatred or no. The official excuse they gave for removing my account and the American Renaissance account was affiliation with a violent extremist group. I have no idea who they're talking about. Not even our most rabid critics have ever tried to associate us with violence. But they say violence, and they don't have to prove it, they don't have to demonstrate it. And so yes, we have sued Twitter. And we are working our way through the courts. We hope to actually bring them to trial soon. But it's a very complicated thing. And as you can imagine, they have unlimited amounts of money. And they are trying to work every possible angle to avoid having to go to court to explain their behavior. But it's outrageous when a company like this can say the pretext they can give for silencing us is so spectacularly, preposterously wrong. And yet, at this point, they're considered completely private operators. They can shut you up for a good reason, or a bad reason, or no reason at all.
That's
we are starting to run out of time here. Jared here has plans, and we need to make sure we won't make him late. And Younes is always so excited when he meets a fellow French speaker. So I'll let him handle the last question in French.
Yeah, that's what I said, but bon, vous êtes né au Japon.
Oui, je suis né au Japon.
Et donc vous êtes japonais.
Et voilà. C'est ce qu'on dirait. Si un Congolais est né en France, est-ce que ça veut dire qu'il est français? Moi, je dirais certainement pas. Moi, je parle japonais mieux que je parle français, presque aussi bien que je parle anglais. Mais je suis certainement pas japonais.
Oui, j'ai vu une vidéo où vous parlez japonais, c'est très marrant. Mais bon, j'ai pas vraiment de questions. C'était un plaisir de vous interviewer.
Oh, je suis vraiment enchanté. Enchanté de vous revoir pour la deuxième fois. On s'est rencontrés pour la première fois en Finlande et aussi encore en Danemark. C'est vraiment un grand plaisir.
Non, la première fois c'était à Rotterdam.
Ah,
La deuxième
oui,
fois c'était à Helsinki.
ah oui, c'est vrai. Troisième fois.
Troisième fois. Maybe we should mention tomorrow's thing shortly.
Yes, yes.
What will happen tomorrow?
Well, we're meeting for the Skansa Forum, and it is a real honor and pleasure for me to be invited to my second Skansa Forum. And you will be live streaming, will you not?
Yes.
So all of you out there, be sure to tune in and pay attention. It will be a wonderful conference.
Yeah, so it's 12 o'clock Danish time, Central European time, and 1 o'clock in Finland, eli kello 1 Suomen aikaa, niin huomenna tällä kanavalla. So, niin.
Thank you so much.
Oh, no, my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.